Make sure to be a member on the channel, link is in the description. Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have the Su-27 flanker. So let's get into it. First of all, let's thank our members, Silami, Astropub, Diaf, and Chala RS. As always, thank you, and thank you my Fishpad members, it helps a lot. Make sure to subscribe, be a member, and join our Discord. So let's get into it. So after a while of research, and it took a while to do the research on this aircraft because there's a lot of variants, like a lot of them. Let's get into the flanker, the normally NATO called flanker, the Su-27, very cool aircraft that the Soviets especially will probably get it in the future of War Thunder, and the Chinese as well. Remember, these videos are I'm making a list of videos. You know, we did the Tornado, we did the F-16, the MiG-29, the MiG-25, and today we're going to talk about the Su-27 as it was voted by the majority of votes, you know, between the F-15 and the Su-27, and then the main members decided to first be the Su-27. Probably next week we are going to see the F-15 as well. Hopefully the F-15 doesn't have these many variants. So hop on, get some popcorn and some drinks because this is going to take a while. So first of all, let's divide the video as always. First of all, with the performance of the aircraft, a little bit of its history, what it was designed to do. After that, we talk about all of its variants, the main production ones, some less production ones, but the main ones. And after that, we are going to talk about what versions we shall see in War Thunder. But remember, on the versions that we shall see in War Thunder, I will only tell you about the early variants because, you know, there's many variants and we don't know where War Thunder will be in like 2 years or 3 years. It's too much time, you know, to think about. So I'm just going to say like next year kind of material, you know, and even a little bit more because the Su-27 is not coming soon, to be honest. Not even the F-15 because they are way too advanced for now. But let's get into it. So the Soviets in 1969 learned about the FX program, which was the F-15 program to decide to make the F-15. And they decided to make a counter, afraid that the Soviet air power would be lacking behind, you know. They already knew about the F-14, they knew about the F-15. Later they would know about the F-16 as well. So they decided to actually build a counter to that. They knew that it was a heavy aircraft, very expensive, with the top of the line features, you know, radar and stuff like that. So they tried to develop a counter to that. So they decided to build the Sukhoi 27. It was initially called the T-10 as the prototype, and it was a twin-engined aircraft, super maneuverable, one of the first in the world to be super maneuverable, made by the Sukhoi Design Bureau in the Soviet Union, supplemented with the MiG-29. So initially the objective was to build only the Su-27, but after a while they decided to divide the project, having a heavier aircraft and a lighter aircraft. So the Su-27 would be the heavier one, made for longer ranges, higher altitudes, and more interception style stuff. And the MiG-29 would be the lighter, cheaper, more advanced MiG-23 kind of thing, you know, MiG-21 kind of thing. And that would be divided between them. So they would supplement each other. The MiG-29 being more faster to get to the target, you know, because it was going to take off from a much closer airfield, you know, and the Su-27 would stay in the air much more time. It would have more range, as I said, and stuff like that, better radar and stuff. So yeah. The design was back on the Su-27. The design was to a high altitude air superiority fighter, a counter to the F-15 and F-14, as I said, designed to have a very long range for interception and also for escort, for bombers, stuff like that. Officially entered service around 1985. There are some reports of even later than that, maybe some earlier than that. I would not count these dates as official because the Soviets tend to actually just change a little bit of the dates up, as you saw on the MiG-29 videos, because of the KGB and CIA stuff. So generally don't trust on these dates, you know. First flight was in 1977 with the T-10 prototype, and after some crashes, many prototypes, as I said, entered service in 1985. Also, there were a couple of, not only for being a superiority fighter, there were a couple of people in the Soviet government that wanted some other versions of the Su-27 to be in other branches, you know. So the Navy wanted two versions. So they wanted basically a substitute to the Su-24 as a naval bomber anti-ship mission, and also a carrier version later. And the Air Force needed a training version as well. So this was the main idea, having all these versions, you know. And yeah, late 80s and stuff, they decided to do the Su-27K, which is the Su-33 and stuff like that. But I'm going to talk about it later a little bit on the variants. Many countries use this aircraft: China, Vietnam, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and many more. I'm not gonna name them all. There's many countries that used it. And after the collapse of the Soviet state, I mean, even though it was developed, all these variants, it was a biplace variant for interception, carrier-based, um, fighter bomber version, approved Su-27, and stuff like that. Because of the collapse of the Soviet state, many of these ideas were developed into many aircraft, like the Su-30, Su-33, Su-34, Su-35, and the demonstrator Su-37 Terminator. All of them I'm going to talk about later a little bit as well. Even China, I mean, you can say that India also kind of built them on internally, but not really. You know, it was just a jointly adventure with Russia. But China built them after 1998, their own Su-27s called the J-11s. So I'm going to talk about that later as well. Obviously, because of the Soviet state collapsing and stuff like that, many things were delayed. But in 2004 onwards, a lot of the old Su-27s were upgraded and more stuff were added to the arsenal and stuff like that. So yeah, pretty interesting. Many variants and other aircraft built, but yeah, as I said, we are going to talk about it later. It was the first Soviet aircraft with a proper FBW, or a fly-by-wire system. The MiG-29 initially didn't have any sort of thing like that. Obviously, there's no such thing as they woke up one day and decided that they figured out how to do a fly-by-wire. Obviously, it's something that comes with development for years and years and years. So yeah, the Soviets already did have early fly-by-wire systems, or capable, just like in the West they had as well. Similar systems in the 60s, in the 70s, but obviously we were getting into an age of proper fly-by-wire as we know today. You know, an aircraft that actually the pilot puts the command on the joystick, for example, and before it goes to the proper ailerons and flight control systems, it will pass through a computer. So there is no direct control, or no, at least not in the main system of the aircraft, there is no direct touch between the pilot and the ailerons and control surfaces, you know, which is a very modern thing. Many aircraft use this. Most of the aircraft use this to this day, you know. So yeah, it was the beginning of that in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. It was very agile, and the same principles of aerodynamics were used between the MiG-29 and the Su-27. Obviously, in the Soviet Union, everything was kind of shared in knowledge, you know. So they didn't have proper patents and stuff like that between companies, because companies didn't exist. So MiG and Sukhoi were not competitors in a sense of a company competing with another company. They were designated projects that they tried to design before and show to the government that it was approved, and then they used the same things that they figured all of them figured out, they shared with all of them. So a lot of principles that they were figuring out on the aerodynamics universities and bureaus, it was shared between the MiG and the Sukhoi design bureaus, as the engines and stuff like that. So the engines were normally the AL-31, which is a Luka engine or Saturn engine, very well known engines made for a lot of Sukhoi aircraft. And it was basically the development of turbofan engines getting into production in the Soviet Union. It was one of the first ones to actually get into production on a fighter like that. It has about 300 meters of second of climb, very similar to the MiG-29, and the range was about 3,500 kilometers. So it was almost twice the amount on the MiG-29. The MiG-29 could carry the bags and stuff like that to actually extend this range to 3,000 kilometers, but normally the Su-27 would just outrange it. So was one of the objectives. That's why it's such a large aircraft, to be honest. The guns, especially the main gun, was the GSH-30-1, which is the same gun as in the MiG-29, 30 millimeter, revolver, 150 rounds. It had the same armaments as normal 1980s Soviet standardized aircraft, so R-27s, R-73s, R-60Ms. It could later in its life use the R-77 and its derivatives, obviously, on the Russian Federation. And it was initially limited to dumb air-to-ground weaponry, with more modern variants using SEAD, TV guiding systems, laser, anti-ship, and more stuff like that. Has an amazing IRST. I didn't find the exact number of detection and stuff like that, but yeah, it's a very good one and probably better than the MiG-29. And initially used the N001 MAC radar. So it didn't have a PESA radar at first, It has the normal pulse Doppler radar with a very, very, very good sensibility to blind speeds, with the same technology as the N019 Rubin radar for the MiG-29. Has about 100 to 140 kilometers range. A fighter size is about 100 kilometers depending on the fighter, and the track range was about 65 kilometers with an azimuth of 120 degrees horizontally, elevation of minus 55 with plus 60 degrees. So used in many wars, obviously in a certain war happening right now, and it was used in Syria and in Africa in some wars as well. So it is a very well combat proven aircraft. So let's get into the variants. So it has many variants, and we're going to talk about basically all of them. So let's get going. First of all, let's talk about the Soviet variants. Then after that, the Soviets had only the Su-27s, and many variants of that. After that, we are going to talk about the post-Soviet Russian versions. And then after that, we have other versions of the Russian production, like the Su-30 and Su-34 and stuff like that we're going to talk about. And finally, we are going to talk about the Chinese J-11 and other variants. So first of all, the original variants. So Su-27 without a designation, just Su-27 was the original initial production, not many built, the normal AL-31 engine, but shortly after they built the first mass-produced version, which is the Su-27S, which was the main fighter of the Soviet Union, together with the MiG-29A and S. It has a AL-31F engine, MAC radar, as I said, R-27Rs, R-73s, later receiving the R-27ER and ET, and it has limited air-to-ground with dumb weapons. Shortly after that, they made the Su-27P, which was the PVO version. It's the same aircraft as the S, but without the air-to-ground weapons. Why is it P? Because P means interceptor for the air defense forces of the Soviet Union, the PVO, which, if you don't know, the Russians and obviously the Soviets, they have two air forces. So they basically an air forces. They have the normal air forces with normal fighters and normal attackers and stuff like that. bombers and stuff, and they have the PVO. The PVO is an air defense force, you know, so it's an integrated system that combines surface-to-air missiles together with GCI controls, AWACS, all the type of radar that you can find on the system. Today we are going to see stuff like satellites being used as well, back in the Soviet Union obviously as well, and obviously interceptors. So you will see the MiG-25s being operated by the PVO, the interceptor variant, the MiG-31, and then we have the MiG 23P, which were P and Bs, which were PVO variants, and now we have the Su-27P. It's a PVO variant. So interceptor, no air-to-ground weapons. Then, as I said before, the Soviet government wanted a Soviet equivalent for a trainer to train pilots but be ready for combat as well. So they made the Su-27UB, which is the first twin seat or B-placed aircraft of the genre, you know, of the Su-27. So yes, basically it is a conversion trainer, but it is combat capable. After that, they made obviously the Su-27SK, which is the export version of the Su-27S. Obviously they wanted to make some money and they sold to China and some other nations, I think. So yeah, export version obviously has less capable systems and stuff, but it is a very capable aircraft as well. Later, they made the Su-27UBK, which is the export version, the same thing as the S, but with the UB. So it is the B-placed trainer for export, the UBK. And after that, this was kind of going to the late 80s, you know. The Navy, as I said before, decided that they wanted a a carrier-based aircraft. So they wanted a Su-27 that was able to be carrier landed, you know, for the new Kuznetsov class carriers that were being produced. So it was later called the Su-33 when it entered in Russian service, but some of the first production aircraft were called the Su-27K. So this is the Su-27K, the Navy version. Uh, Built with many different things, you know. It was basically the S, but it had canards, a better fly-by-wire system, a better engine, the AL31F3, which had like 3 kilonewtons more each to take off, you know, because the Soviets decided not to use steam catapults in the Kuznetsov class, so they had to have a little bit more power for more, you know, payload heavy missions, you know. Obviously, it had stronger gears, arresting gears. It had an update on the radar to better look down capabilities over the sea. It has the in-flight refueling probe, or the IFR. A larger control surfaces, you know, better flaps, better fuselage in general, more strength in the fuselage to, I mean, could so that it could hold the impacts and stuff like that. And yeah, basically this is it. And there was a prototype of a twin seat version of the K called the KUB, which would be a trainer but just one prototype. And in 2016 and stuff like that, they received the SVP mode, the SVP 24 air to ground system. So they are being more upgraded until this day a little bit, you know. After that, they received the Su-27M. They received this kind of a not the right word, you know. It's they developed the Su-27M, which was supposed to be the same as in the MiG-29M. So they were developing. Obviously, they already had the MiG-31 on service, you know. And the big feature of the MiG-31 was the PESA radar, which is kind of the first iteration of an AESA radar. You know, it only used a very large transmitter instead of many little ones, as in the not transmitters, the frequency generator. Basically, it's one larger one instead of many little ones. In the AESA, it's like that. If you want to, I can make a video about it. It's kind of complicated, but yeah. But what it means is that the PESA radar have like many transmitters. So what it means, it can actually hard lock many targets at the same time. The MiG-31 already did that, and they developed the technology until it could fit in a Su-27 and a MiG-29. And that was basically the first thing that they thought on, of putting on the Su-27M and on the MiG-29M. As you saw in the MiG-29M, many prototypes never actually entered in full production, and the Su-27M is the same kind of thing. Had 9 prototypes and 3 production aircraft, but because of the way that things were going, they changed the name for Su-35 later in its life. So this is 1988, for example, something like that, 88, 89. It had canards, a reshaped wing, structural reinforcement. As I said, the PESA radar, which was one of the main features, which was the N011 bars radar, a very well-known radar and very good. As I said, bars radar is nothing compared to what we have in game right now. To be honest, it's it can detect targets kind of simultaneously, like it has literally almost no detection time, the time between the radar doing its cycle on radars that we have right now in game. It basically just detects everything at the same time instantaneously, kind of instantaneously. So it is very effective. It could target 6 targets at a time with the ability of actually hard locking the 6 targets and launching R27s if they want to. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Obviously, they used um, some more air-to-ground stuff, so TV-guided stuff and more seed stuff and stuff like that, anti-ship. Obviously, they would change that as well. And it has one of the first, I mean, it is the first to have in the world a rear radar. So it has the N012 rear radar, which is a radar to detect the missiles behind you. Doesn't matter if it's a radar missile or a IR missile, but it is made more for IR missiles. But it has a radar tilted backwards so that you can see IR missiles coming from you, and automatically you would deploy flares, or even the pilot could deploy flares and stuff like that. So it is one of the things that normally most of the 4th plus generation aircraft have now, and even 5th generation have now. But the Su-27M was the first in the world to have that. So pretty interesting, right? An aircraft that used many composites to be used in the strength of the fuselage. Obviously, it had a better engine with 132 kilonewtons reach, so basically 10 kilonewtons more. And as I said, even the avionics were better. I mean, it has monochrome displays like the MiG-29M and stuff. So yeah, this was the pinnacle of the technology of the Soviet Union in the late 80s. It was just the best out there and very amazing, and putting kind of a check to what the Americans had, to be honest. And it would be interesting to see if the Soviet Union survived a little bit more, what kind of aircraft would have emerged from these large amounts of money getting into aircraft. But yeah, simultaneously in 1989 with the Su-27M, they made the Su-27PU, which was to be a 2-seater interceptor variant for the PVO based on the UB. So it was basically a P variant but with 2 seats, with better 2-seat capabilities and stuff like that, because the PVO liked the proved concept of having 2 guys flying the aircraft, as an interceptor. It helps a lot. So this would be technically the first Su-30, but it was called the Su-27PU while in Soviet design. And also the Su-27IB, which was later called the Su-32 or the Su-32FN, which was later called the Su-34. It took a while to this aircraft to actually enter service, but it is basically the fighter bomber version. Around 1990, 1989, 1990 was the development together with the 27M and the 27PU. But it was a 2 seats as well, but with the 2 pilots sitting side by side, shoulder to shoulder, instead of in a tandem. Yeah, many obviously had the N0112 radar, 12 radar. Had a PESA radar on the front as well. And yeah, as I said, it took a while to get into service, more than 10 years later in Russian service. But these were the main variants. So yeah, we kind of see the start of the Su-35, the Su-30s, and the Su-34s that we see, and the Su-33s as well. So yeah, basically these are the Soviet variants. After the Soviet Union collapsed, many variants were made, but mainly upgrades, you know. But let's talk a little bit about the Su-37 demonstrator. So the Terminator, a well-known aircraft, was basically a technology demonstrator on the late 90s. You know, it was from 1997, if I'm not mistaken. It was basically the evolution of the Su-27M and basically proving what the Sukhoi design can do, you know, what the flanker can be in the future. And it is just amazing. I mean, I don't think there were many built of these, one or two, I think. But you know, it had a digital fly-by-wire system, thrust vectoring engines, being the AL37FU, with new FedEx and stuff. So it had 142 kilonewtons, very strong engines. It has the new Bars M radar, which is also a PESA radar, being able to track 8 targets at the same time and having like 300 kilometers of range. It's amazing. And obviously being a PESA radar, it can hard lock many targets. It can do a lot of things. PESA radars and the EASA radars are amazing, amazing. Obviously, it had the N012 rear radar as the other ones. It was one of the first Russian aircraft to use LSD avionics and better HUDs and stuff like that. So it was just a technology demonstrator of what the Su-37 can do. Amazing aircraft, and many technologies developed from the Su-27M were built into the Su-37, the Su-27M to the Su-37, and many of the Su-37 were built back on upgrades for the Su-27s already produced, and eventually on the Su-35, and eventually even the Su-57. So it is a pretty amazing aircraft. Obviously, they had to make upgrades with the development of the Su-35 and Su-37. So I think it was 2000 and something. They made the Su-27 SM. This is from Russia, and the Su-27 UBM. So the SM and the UBM are MLU upgrades, so midlife upgrades for the Su-27Ss and Su-27 UBs. So basically using the Su-27M, Su-35 and Su-37 technology built into the Su-27S, you know, so R-77 missiles, guided air-to-ground stuff like KH-29s and SEAD, anti-ship, stuff like that. Just an upgrade to the Su-27. Obviously they made upgrades for that, like that for the SK variant, the export variant as well. So basically had the same upgrade with certain, you know, less capable systems for the upgrades, called the Su-27 SKM. And after that they made the Su-27 SM2 and SM3, which are the most advanced Sukhoi 27s that there are out there. So the SM2 was upgraded from the SM with the technology from the Su-35BM, with the Irbis E PESA radar with 350 kilometers, better avionics, better engine, better everything. And the SM3 is an SM2 with full glass cockpit, better engine as well, with more weight limits and stuff. So they made upgrades for the SMs as well, using the Irbis radar, which is the most advanced radar that I think they have right now, if at least publicly, you know. Obviously, the Ukrainians made upgrades for their Su-27s too, but it is hard to find information about it. And yeah, basically there is that. Other versions, obviously, these were the Su-27s. I think we can call, first of all, the Su-35 because it was the pinnacle of all the technology developed from the Su-37 to the Su-27M and all the other Sukhois. It was the Su-35S. It was basically the Su-27M, but they changed the name for commercial reasons, you know. It is the mass production version of the Su-27M with the AL41 F1S engines, 137 kilonewtons, with thrust vectoring, and yeah, basically the most advanced version. It is kind of hard to find stuff, but he also uses the Airbus E radar, PESA, you know. It can fire basically everything that the Russians have, obviously. I mean, SEAD, anti-ship, R-77s -1. In the future, you would be able to carry the R-77M. So yeah, it's the most advanced version of the single-seat fighter, you know. China used as well this version for limited numbers, but still amazing aircraft, and this is the pinnacle of the fighter version of the Su-35. But as you saw, um, they were developing some other versions. As I said, first of all, the carrier version, the Su-27K, was later becoming the Su-33. As I said, it kind of got some upgrades in its life. Mainly in 2016, it received the SVP-24, which most of the Russian aircraft actually use this system now, which is a system that makes dumb bombs be as precise as guided bombs or guided rockets and stuff, using satellites and a lot of things, you know, a lot of sensors. And I'm not gonna get too much into it because there's not much to talk about. It's a very, I mean, it's 2016, so there's not much to talk about there. It's still classified, everything like that. So yeah, but also they produce the Su-30 and the Su-34, which are the B-placed versions. So the Su-30 had many versions. So after 1991, the Su-27PU was renamed the Su-30. 5 units were built, you know, but the Soviet state collapsed and stuff like that. It took a while to get back to it and stuff like that. So basically they had the Su-30K, an export version for India, you know, as the Su-30, the normal Su-30, which normally pulse Doppler radar, you know, it's the PU. So normal pulse Doppler radar, nothing fancy, 1980s technology. Then in the 2000s and something, they made the Su-30M, an upgraded version with all these technology used on the Su-27M and the Su-37 and 35. They used on these aircraft. So PESA radar, not widely introduced into Russian service, but it is hard to find information about the Su-30M. But it is basically a Su-27 SM, kind of, you know. But I mean, even a mix between SM and SM2, but as an upgrade, you know. After that, we had the Su-30MK, which is all the K variants are exported. So we have the MK, the MKI, MKA, MKM, MKK, MK2, MKV, or MK2 AMV, MK2V, and yeah, basically this is it. There's so many variants. So the MK, basically an M version for India with avionics made in that. MKI, an MK, but together made with India, more made with India. Had thrust vectoring canards, the BARS radar, very good radar as I said before. PESA radar, 123 kilonewtons. R-77 can use the Astra missiles and Israeli derbies, very fun stuff. The MKA is an MKI used by Algeria with French and Russian avionics. The MKM is a Su-30 used by Malaysia with the BARS M radar, has thrust vectoring, and it was basically MKI with those upgrades. Then we have the MKK, which is the export version for China, with more common stuff with the Su-35. So it depends. It has the Zuk radar, which the Zuk radar, was trying to remember the name, is the most advanced version of the Russian radars, the PESA radars, not the Airbus. It's the Zuk, if I'm not mistaken. So depending on customer, it has some differences. For example, MKK, as I said, it has a different radar and more stuff in common with the Su-35. MK2, better systems, you know, made for the Chinese Navy. MKV or MK2 AMV, it was an MK2 built for Venezuela with the Su-35 airframe as the base for the aircraft. MK2V was the Vietnamese version of the MK2, but with different comms and different ejection seats for different sized pilots for the Vietnam Air Force. So many export versions, as you see, and each client has its own thing. Of course, I'm simplifying a lot here because there's so many variants and I cannot have a video of 1 hour. So yeah, basically this is it. But remember, the Su-30 is the B-placed version used mostly for a multi-role kind of thing. The Russians, of course, had as well improved versions of the aircraft. So the Su-30 SM, it is the Russian version of the MKI with the Bars M radar, 400-kilometer radar, PESA obviously. Basically can do anything. See the air-to-air definition of multi-role. It can do anything. The Su-30 is the perfect weapon to be used for anything, to be honest, because the ability to carry two pilots helps a lot on the missions. So a lot of countries like this, and it kind of saves a little bit of money on training and stuff because you can actually train on the aircraft itself. So yeah. The SME is an export version of the SM, but with only the Russian avionics. And then we have the SM2 and the M2. So the SM2 was basically the most advanced version of the Su-30. It was initially called the SM1, but it was changed because of the many upgrades that it had. It has the N035 Ibis radar, Su-35 radar. It has the Su-35 engines with the thrust factory and stuff, AL41F1S, and it has more armaments like the Cab 250, for example, which is a guided 250 kilobomb, very interesting. And then we have the Su-30M2, which is basically an MK2, so a kind of a simplified version compared to the SM2. Used for combat training for the SM, SM2, Su-35, so it is a less advanced version of the Su-30 for training and stuff like that. Obviously, the last version that we are going to talk about is the Su-34. It was initially called, as I said, Su-32, and when the Russians tried to sell the aircraft, not a lot of people bought the aircraft back in the day in the 90s. But then they decided to use them, and they are using a lot of them, especially in the Syrian civil war and stuff. So yeah, basically the production Su-34 is the production version of the Su-32 fighter bomber with everything that the Russians shoot, obviously, anti-ship, everything, SEAD, air-to-air, R-77s, R-27s, R-73s, R-74s, everything. Has the V004 radar, which is a PESA radar, but it is a little bit limited with only 120 kilometers of range against air-to-air, but it can have a terrain system and air-to-ground systems that it's hard to find what's the capability of that. It has an RWR integrated to the 012 radar, the rear radar that we talked about it. Obviously, I think we didn't talk about it before, but I think most of the aircraft has this radar, so the Su-30 and SM2, the Su-35, the Su-27 SM, obviously is a system that is very capable, and I think, I would guess that most of the Russian aircraft use them. So yeah, it even had a quote there that it is able to fire, because of the radar, it can fire the R-73 or 74 at a 6 o'clock target, but I don't know about that. Not gonna confirm anything because I really don't know. So yeah, but basically it is the duck. It's called the duck because it is the two seats on the tandem with the nose. It kind of becomes a duck there. And they might be making a Su-34M or an export version, a Su-34ME, but nothing confirmed. So these are the Russian versions, all the Russian versions, all the Soviet versions, and now we are going to briefly talk about the Chinese versions. Obviously, they decided to buy the Su-27's SK initially, but then in the late 90s, 1998, they decided to build their own Su-27 SKs. They are the same aircraft but built in China with some Russian-made kits, So it's called the J11A. But then shortly after, they made the J11B, which is the Chinese-developed variant, with some domestic subsystems and stuff like that, with the Block 02 using even Shenyang WS-10 engines, which are internally built AL-31 engines, domestically built. Obviously, you will have a naval version, naval B-placed version, and a normal B-placed version. So the normal B-placed version of the J11B is the J11BS. The single seat naval version of the J11B is the J11BH, and then the naval version of the B-placed version is the J11BSH. So a lot of versions. Jeez. They had the J11BG, which had technically it could carry an EASA radar. Apparently, it's speculated to use it. So not gonna talk too much about it. And then we have the J11D, which is an upgraded with electronic warfare and stuff, better engines, better avionics, more better use of composites, lower radar signature, so just a better version of the normal J11B. Then we have three variants, three aircraft, new aircraft that they actually built. So the J15, which is a single seat and a B-placed. It could be the J15 and the J15S, which are a single seat and a B-placed carrier version, domestically built by China, after some problems with intellectual properties and agreements with Russia. Russia wanted them because they stole something, or I don't know. I don't know. Russia says that they did something, and China said something else. I'm not gonna get into it too much because of politics, but it is basically the Su-33 made in China, you know. And then we have the J15D, which is the electronic warfare version, 2 seats. It is in trial right now, so they have these versions of that. And then they have the J16, which is a B-placed version of the J11 for the Air Force with the better WS-10A engines, EASA radars, better radar absorbent paint and more improvements, with the J16D being the electronic warfare version. Of course, these electronic warfare versions are versions that don't even have cannons. You know, they have more seeds and more sensors and stuff like that. So these are all the variants that you should know about. You know, there are a couple of minor variants here and there that I might have missed, so let me know in the comments. But yeah, and the versions that we shall see in War Thunder. We are not going to mention too much about the advanced versions, post-Soviet versions, you know, because it's too much into the future, okay? So we are going to just talk about the things that we shall see right now, maybe a little bit more in the future, like when we get F-15Cs and F-18s and even more stuff, you know? So first of all, I think the two main aircraft that we shall see is the Su-27S and the Su-27SK for Russia and the Soviets and the Chinese. I think these are the main variants that we shall see in the quote-unquote near future. Once we get F-15s and stuff like that, maybe even more aircraft. The Su-27S, being the normal variant, would carry the R-60s and the R-27s. No advanced stuff, you know, just normal pulse doppler radar, has TWS, has a very good blind speed filtering and stuff like that, but still, it is just the 80s version, you know, which I think it's the fairest thing to do. And obviously the Chinese receiving the Su-27SK being the export variant of these aircraft. After a while, in the future, as I said, 1 year from now or even more, I think the Soviets should receive the Su-27M, being that it entered in production, because it was still an early aircraft, or the Su-30M, or both, I don't know, depending on how many aircraft the Americans have or other nations. These are more like when the Eurofighter Typhoon comes and when Fox 3s are in the AIM-120s and R-77s, so a lot more advanced stuff, you know, because we are going to talk about PESA radars and stuff like that. But I think we shall see them in the future as well, the Su-27M or the Su-30M. Obviously, we can see these in the Air Force, you know, line. But obviously, I think after a MiG-29K, maybe we can see the Su-33, because it's basically the same aircraft as the Su-27S, but being able to be carrier landed, you know, with a better engine and stuff like that. So it would be a normal aircraft to have. Maybe also, but I don't know about that. Maybe in the far future, the Su-34, because it is a fighter bomber version. And yeah, basically the Su-30 could be added as well as a subgroup inside the Su-27. The Su-27 PU or the Su-30, the normal one, could also be added as well there, just to have a different version, you know. There's so many variants that you can. I mean, the Americans can be receiving 6, 7 aircraft, and the Russians also can receive these many aircraft. And to be honest, you will see a lot of European countries lacking some stuff. Where they would put that in the Soviet variants, I really don't know, because the Soviet tech tree is kind of weird right now. So I would just ignore that a little bit and see if they fix the tree a little bit. And for the Chinese, I think the Su-27 SK would be under the J8s or something like that, or the J10, I don't know. And after that, we shall receive the J11B RBS, which is the B-placed version. And after that, we can receive more and more versions with EASA radars and stuff like that. But this is too much into the future. So for now, I think the Su-27S and Su-27SK are the main aircraft that we should receive in like 1 year. And maybe in the future, the J11 carrier version, the Su-33, maybe some other versions like that. So yeah, but basically this is it for the aircraft. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a long video, so thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe, be a member if you enjoy this content. And I see you guys next week, because I will be covering the F-15. So I hope you enjoyed, and I see you guys on the next one. Bye guys.